So, I know that sounds a bit crazy and outlandish. Like, why did it take you 22 years to design a character? But if you watch this video until the very end, I promise you, you'll understand why it's taken me so long to finalize this character design, and if it truly was paralysis due to overanalysis. Hey there, fellow Nite Owls. This is Anna Richardson, artist and founder of Middnite Designs. I just want to welcome you to this video, and if it's your first time being here, and if you enjoy the content, please make sure to hit the like button. In this video, I will be showing footage of my latest character design sheet for my OG character Middnite, who, as you would assume from the title of this video, is the aforementioned 22-year character design. So, a not too quick backstory of how I first came up with my character Middnite. It was way back in 1998. Yes, 1998. When I was just 9 years old, living in the west side of San Antonio, Texas. During this time, I was just starting to watch cartoons and shows like Pokemon and Digimon before I knew what anime was. So I was basically just creating my own Pokemon designs, practicing how to draw and writing poetry. I was inspired to create my own main character after watching those shows, and at first, her name wasn't Middnite. It was actually Anna, and she was a personification of myself. I also put my siblings and friends in the story too. 2 years later, I drew a 10-page comic that I named Dare the World. Anna and her friends just got into a huge battle that ends up sending her and her friends flying in different directions. See the Digimon inspiration? After a while, Middnite, or Anna then, was fighting demons and such. I would like to say that this was heavily influenced from watching Shaman King, Inuyasha, and playing the first Devil May Cry game. Also, I kind of borrowed my mom's copy of Stephen King's The Dark Tower, and I fell in love with Roland Deschain, the gunslinging protagonist. So much so that Anna, not me, my character, became the solemn gunslinger. I even remember the first line of the book. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. That's one of my favorite lines, and one of my favorite book series. So, while my friends were creating stories that were either cute or pure storylines, my stories took a dark turn from the powers of friendship to this gun-toting, blue-haired chick that straight up was wrecking demons. I started to feel weird for that. Though in 2003, I started to watch anime on Adult Swim like Cowboy Bebop, Trigun, and Outlaw Star, and I started checking out mangas from my local library like Faust, Battle Angel, Alita, and others that were very sci-fi and cyberpunk. These events opened my eyes to the more mature world of anime, and I immediately fell in love with it. I decided that when I grew up, I wanted to be a professional mangaka. So, in 2004, my mother passed away. And at 14, I fell into a deep depression. I was the oldest of 7, and we really didn't know how to handle or deal with the grief of losing our mom. I kind of stopped drawing a lot and went back to writing. At that time, it became much more darker poetry. My father, in the end, made a big life-changing decision to move us away from everyone and everything we knew, and had us pack our bags and move to Maryland, live with his family over here on the East Coast. I feel like I need to explain this part of my life so you guys can know why her name changed from Anna to Middnite. It had only been about 2 months since my mom passed from unknown medical complications, but she was my biggest supporter, even going so far as to watch anime with me, get me heavily into Harry Potter, and give me new books to draw inspiration from. My dad was a mess after losing pretty much his soulmate, so I spent a lot of my time having to care for my siblings, the youngest being only 3 years old at the time, and it took a toll on me creatively. But I did get to know my family over here on the East Coast better, and I wanted to find some type of normalcy. So, at one point, my cousin got a hold of my poetry, and he was like, "We need to call the local radio station and read it during this segment called 96.3 WHUR, The Quiet Storm." I was nervous, but I went along with it, and when the DJ asked for my name, I told him my name was Middnite, MIDNIGHT. My favorite time of the day was the nighttime. I spent a lot of my childhood under the stars, either singing off key or drawing under the moonlight. So when he asked me how to spell it, I completely choked. I spelled it Middnite. I just kept going. After I finished reading the poem, I kind of wanted to call back to correct the spelling, but my cousin was against it and told me that it sounded cool. At some point during this time, I decided, yeah, I guess it is cool, and I thought back to my character Anna and decided to give her the name instead. Even though I ended up keeping the pseudonym for myself. Oops. So with Middnite getting the name change, I decided to pick up her story again by drawing a one-page comic of her. By this time, I realized that I needed to seriously start studying how to draw. I remember that I wanted to become a mangaka, and I didn't want to wallow in my grief anymore, not for my creative self, nor for my siblings. So began the different phases of Middnite. In 2005, Middnite's design was the furthest from my reality. She was completely Hispanic, Mexican, and she only spoke Spanish. I'm Afro-Latina, and I didn't grow up speaking Spanish. She was light-skinned and had straight blue hair. I don't have straight blue hair. And because I grew up in a Mexican neighborhood, or the barrio, I always wanted her to speak Spanish even though I forgot how to. This was before a time that I had learned to truly embrace my black side. I mean, I am black, and I was black then, but I didn't know what it meant to be black, you know? And I was too young to realize what some people actually meant when commenting on my looks or otherness. So, between the years of 2006 and 2010, I met my future husband, Neff, and his friends, who had formed a group called Heaven and Hell Comics during their school years. Right after high school, I got a chance to spend some time with the group's illustrious writer, my hubby, who was completely enthralled with my artwork at the time, and he even asked me to draw his own story, Nephilim the Vampire Hunter. This caused me to deflect from Middnite and her story as I was focused on drawing this comic. I have to say, I was pretty flattered that someone really liked my artwork, and it felt great to be in a group of creatives who also were comic writers and artists. So I spent a lot of time with them, learning from them, for better or worse. I'll explain that part later. They also introduced me to the world of Western comics. That's not to say that I'd never read them, because I did check out a few from the libraries in Texas, but they got me hip to some of their favorites, and even opened my eyes to the world of webcomics. By this time, I stumbled upon Anita Blake's graphic novels, and saw my style starting to become less anime. As I grew, I started to face criticism from my friends on my process of learning how to draw. My first few years of learning, I would trace/copy poses, literally taping paper to the TV or computer screen to help me better understand anatomy, perspective, and even clothing. I couldn't afford art books, oldest of 7, and I didn't really have online guides to help me back then. Or rather, I didn't know I did. So let me just say here, I think tracing and referencing is a great way for beginners to understand how it feels to draw anatomy and such correctly, for practice only. Never claim a piece of artwork as your own, and always credit the original source if you draw heavy inspiration from someone else's artwork. But drawing from inspiration from poses, styles, and fashion is how we as artists thrive. Referencing is essential, so do it. But for a long time, this was taboo in the young art world. My new art friends and peers seriously made me feel bad for using references or recommending them or asking for them. This led to a halt in my development of my style and technique as I became discouraged to draw anything other than what I could pull from my mind, from memory. And to note, I have shitty memory. Things pretty much kept on this discourse for some time. I drew my hobbies to be comic. They got revamped into Nephilim the Hunter, practiced my personal art in more or less secret, and had a family of my own as I struggled with how to make my dreams of becoming a mangaka/comic artist come to fruition. Life had its ups and downs, and Middnite was drawn a lot during this time, but I ended up leaning a bit too heavily on the sex appeal angle that American comics constantly went for their women protagonists. I thought, well, I guess Middnite should be sexy too. And that's what I would call Middnite's Barbie face. She had a lot of different looks as I searched for what was my style. I drew in Disney style, rekindled my love for Ghibli movies and their style, and just didn't know what to do with her. However, in summer of 2015, I met an associate's art professor who completely ripped into me and my friend's artwork when I showed it to him. It was a pretty harsh experience. I never had someone with an art degree take the time to tell me exactly what to do to better myself, or really how, and what shortcuts to avoid. Shortcuts he saw my friends take and stunted their growth. I would later learn this stunted them to the point of no longer pursuing art as a career. I did later cry it out. He didn't hold back. But he said I had something. And that's all I needed to stop holding myself back from creating Middnite Story, from being a better artist. He told me that I need to stop listening to my friends' advice on how to draw because that was limiting me, and to instead focus on strengthening my understanding through studying references, really getting into fundamentals of art, all of that. Video of that coming someday. So, for 2 straight years, from 2016 to 2018, I focused on studying anatomy, perspective, color theory, the works. In December of 2016, with this new mindset of learning, I drew Middnite once again and made her hair more curly. Up until now, her hair was straight. That it is what it is. But it wasn't until 1 year later that I would attempt to draw her again. During this time, I was becoming much more comfortable with drawing digitally. At first, my process was to draw traditionally and then transfer the image to a program like Photoshop with a scanner and colored it on there. But I was beginning to just create images strictly on the computer using a Wacom tablet for the first time. I was also beginning to focus more on designing an outfit that would match the setting of Middnite's world, which was post-apocalyptic dystopian. Think Hunger Games meets Inuyasha. I should mention that during this time, I had told my husband that I wanted to show Middnite when she was younger. Maybe have it be a sequel to the original story. I had by this time taken a lot of the old main story concepts, a group of adventurers in the middle of a war against these powerful cyber demons, and edited the out of it. I dropped characters, added new ones not based on friends entirely, and learned more about character creation, and all around decided that what type of protagonist Middnite was to be. She went from anime to sexy to heartless, if you will, with the key component to that contributing from her backstory and the deaths she witnessed as a child of hunters in a demon-plagued world. But he kept insisting that I make it a prequel, so I ended up giving it some thought. In 2018, at the end of my time in the hyperbolic time chamber, I realized he was right, and it was a great idea, and decided to draw a younger Middnite after receiving a photo album from my best friend from back in Texas. Let me clarify this part. I knew we were pretty brown, skin-wise, because as 90s kids living in Texas, we spent a lot of time outside, camping, biking, climbing trees, swimming in rivers. A lot of time. When we moved here, we didn't really spend as much time in the sun, and it's a lot colder here and more often humid than sunny, you know? So I guess I began to lighten up. My siblings say I turned gray. Becoming a digital artist and working at my desk a lot also didn't really help my complexion a lot. And that's the sad truth of it. So I wanted to show that old outdoorsy childhood Anna in younger Middnite's design. I also changed the texture of her hair from just being curly to more of my texture, somewhere between 3B, 3C. I loved my fro and fought for wearing it at my military high school, even though they had this stupid code of telling us to wear professional styles only. Fuck that noise. I rocked my afros and puffs in my childhood and refused to change that. It was weird to me in this predominantly black area that I now lived in that there was this stigma to straighten or change my hair. I blame that on the naivete of growing up on the edges of my African American heritage for 15 years. So, take it as you will. Years later, I began to understand and felt it even more important to give Middnite as much as me as possible, as much as I felt possible, instead of making her have this supposed ideal look. I've always been a bit of a rebel, thus ending Middnite's Barbie era. Anyways, I love this new look of hers I was starting to make, and decided to dive more into creating this new story that was going to predate Dare the World, which my husband told me should be called Dare to Hunt. I should also probably say, but quickly for the sake of the length of this video now, because of my rebellious streak, I was a bit of a traviosa, mischief maker as my mom nicknamed me, and the title Dare the World stemmed from my need to fight back, to push back on norms and dare the world to tell me I'm wrong. I was labeled a tomboy, didn't feel like I identified with the norms of my gender, and even had a girlfriend or two. I couldn't figure out why I was different, and for better, my mom embraced that. So I made sure Middnite and her stories embodied that feeling of being a fighter, of being different and loving it. So the prequel, now main story, Dare to Hunt, was about a young girl whose parents were murdered by demons, and instead of cowering and being defeated, she fought back. She decided to be different and change what was normal in her world, striving to kill every last demon. Pretty grand of her, I know, but she is me, and I'm pretty stubborn. If you can't tell, hint hint, 22-year character design. So I began writing an outline, and everything that I previously came up with, again for Middnite's world, I destroyed and rebuilt. I mean, like, I really destroyed it this time. It's dead. It was for the best, because everything previous was riddled with cliches and very tropey two-dimensional characters and villains with no reason, and it was etchy as it was unnecessary. As I started to create new characters and illustrations, I started making prints and selling them at conventions. I miss conventions. This was also my first time doing anything like that, and with the help from the awesome individuals of Artway Alliance, I had a table, and Middnite now had a new stage. People, if I can humble brag real quick, really loved her, and I was always asked to explain her story whenever someone came to my table and saw my latest illustration of Dare the Hunt. It was really fun, and scary, and empowering. I had one person one time just standing by someone else as I told Middnite's story, and when I was done talking to them, he just moved over and came up and asked to buy the largest print of her that I had. I was moved to tears. Every time I think about it, I kind of am. It felt like something was clicking into place. So, in 2019 of February, I went back to adult Middnite and decided to make her look more like me. Like, really more like me. All the way. Which meant giving her the darker skin tone from my childhood, since she'd be in the sun more, and even my nose, a topic of distaste in my younger years, and my mother's maiden name. That was something I debated on for years, giving Middnite and her family my mother's maiden name, Escobedo, in honor of her. She was my biggest supporter and inspiration, so it was definitely time. I no longer cared about the beauty standards either for women characters and decided to make Middnite more muscular, even if it gave her a more masculine appearance. I didn't care. To note again, I was a very fit kid. I was in the soccer club and the swim team. All in my high school years, I did marching band from middle to high school too. That's a lot of walking, carrying an instrument and walking miles. You had to be fit. And, well, I can't and I couldn't sit still. So I always kind of idolized abs and energized characters and toned physiques. I wish I can get back into athleticism hardcore again. Anyways, I decided to share this new image of Middnite on my social media pages, and the responses were pretty positive. I was surprised. This pretty much reaffirmed that being the most true to myself and my ideals and creativity brought me the freedom I was looking for, that I struggled and fought tooth and nail for. Then I was her own person, and is also me. And though there might be some people, even to this day, that didn't like her change or my growth, I think it was more important that I enjoyed it, and that it shows. So, now that we're finally back in the present, with all that information and all that backstory, I can definitely say it wasn't paralysis due to overanalysis. I did think that might be the case at one time. I spent quite a deal of time thinking of how to make the best story ever, with the best female protagonist ever, and definitely gave Middnite a lot of weird design choices. but it didn't paralyze me. I wasn't scared, and it didn't scare me enough to not attempt to find Middnite's final design over the past 22 years. I always went back to drawing her and trying time and time again to refresh her story. It was more so I had to understand who I was, why things happened to me, and who that made me, and who that made Middnite. I had to find my voice, my genre, my style. So, to the people that are in the same boat as I am, you can't really rush this. You can't rush the design process. A lot of times it's akin to a tree or a seedling. Give it time to grow, time to truly mature. Not every design or character is this way, of course, but for those that are, give yourself time to breathe, think, take a much needed break, and then throw yourself back in there. It's not something that needs to be rushed, and you'll feel much better knowing that you gave these stories and characters your all of you. In my experience, the audience really appreciated that. I, for one, am glad I gave Middnite Escobedo all the time she needed to be my awesome, Afro-Latina, Spanglish-speaking, gun-toting, blue-haired chick that is straight up wrecking demons. If you stayed this long, thanks. It means a lot to me. If you're interested in any of the things that really helped me come into my particular style over the years, well, I'd like to thank and give a huge shout out to Mark Brunet's YouTube channel, aka QBrush. He was an art teacher for a time and really helped poor artists like me, who couldn't afford to go to college, get quality feedback and tips on how to get the structure and education we needed, and not conform to the art school's preferred method of teaching. I highly suggest him for anyone needing a good place to start, and if you haven't already, check him out. He has an amazing playlist on coming up with character design concepts and all of that. Another great YouTuber and artist to check out is Lisbeth Jimenez of My Mangaka Life. She's a stunningly amazing traditional mangaka with 4 mangas already under her belt and a beautiful style. She has great tips on how to start drawing comics, script writing, character expressions, all that in between. That's just 2 I suggest, but there's a whole community out there now, not limited to your peers or friends or parents. The world has evolved so much since 20 years ago, and so has the art world. Join some groups, find people to brainstorm ideas with, and definitely don't be afraid to pick apart your design or story and try again. Now that we've come to the end, I gotta know, did anyone else have character designs or stories that they've been working on for a long time? Anything that just stuck with you and you're too stubborn to let go of? If you're like me and don't know when to quit, comment below and tell me, how long have you been at it? What was it about this character or story that made you refuse to let it go? And if you want to see more content like this where I go in depth with my character history, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring that bell, because Middnite and I are only just getting started. Draw magic!